Yes, there's cyber risk and threats, but there are huge opportunities that come with that. All things we just discussed, in the medical area, the medical Internet of Things, being able to specifically target a treatment to a patient. I think those are huge improvements, and smart devices, you know, and of course, I think our task is really, or our challenge is to work together. And it's always just not law enforcement. That's the CSET community, that's industry, that's academia, that's civil society. Everybody come together to make sure that we actually turn that into something, a secure and safe cyberspace.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO at Delinea, and it's a pleasure to be here with you for another exciting episode. And I've got an awesome guest, a true superhero person who's fighting cybercrime every single day. So, welcome to the show, Philipp Amann. Can you tell us about yourself and what you do and some of the favorite things you get up to?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's really great, pleasure to be on your podcast, and looking forward to the discussion. So, Philipp Amann, I'm the head of strategy of the European Cybercrime Centre. We're part of Europol. Europol being, the EU's law enforcement agency. So as you mentioned, our main sort of job is support the EU member states in combating cyber.
Fantastic. And what's some of the things? What's your favorite things to get up to? What's some of your passions? Do you have any exciting things that you enjoy doing yourself?
You mean apart from
Apart
work
from
and yeah.
apart from work and cybercrime.
Well, definitely, you see the bike in the background is actually, I do like to cycle. We're based in The Hague, so being close to the sea, I come originally from a landlocked country, so being close to the sea and doing all sorts of swimming, going sailing. I think that's something well, a passion, and I'm still developing that. But that's certainly some of the things I'd love to do. And the Netherlands is a perfect country for that.
It's a perfect place for that, absolutely. And today's topic is definitely it's all about, and it's one that we've had numerous discussions on over the past couple of years at different events that we've been meeting up at. And for me, I think it's a big passion. Anytime an opportunity comes up to talk about the complexities of fighting cybercrime, because it's not easy. Bringing something from an initial investigation right through the prosecution, that can actually, be a very long process, can be a very complex process. Can you tell me, how do some of the investigations start? What is the starting point for investigating a cybercrime? How do they get brought to attention? Who brings them to attention? Is it, country certs? Is it law enforcement? Is it the victims? What's the initial process look like?
So yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it is a very complicated space to be in. That requires a very sort of holistic response involving different communities. So for us, I think what's quite unique, in case just to explain how Europol works. What's quite unique is for us is that we don't start our own investigations. We're here to support member states or non-EU partners with whom we have an operational agreement. So we provide those services. So typically, to answer your question, what happens is it will be a member state that approaches us and say, well, can you please help us? And they may get that information from industry in their country, or from the CSERT community, or from most likely, or which is very common, from the national law enforcement agency. And what you typically have is, especially with cybercrime, it will involve 2 or more countries, which is one of the criteria for Europol to become active. So this is where I think, as an agency and as EC3, the European Cybercrime Centre, I think we really embody the, if you will, the law enforcement as a service, principles. We provide key services, key expertise to member states. But it is complicated, as you said, and it's typically, the successes that we have is the result of, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, 4-year-long investigations that require often a truly international network to be successful.
Absolutely. And for me, definitely, it's once you get into, is it different when it's only happening within the European members? Because I love what you said is, law enforcement as a service. Because for me, being based in Estonia, the government do see themselves as a service provider to the citizens, and I really do see law enforcement, as a service, to the citizens as well, and to corporates and businesses and countries and so forth. Um, for when it gets into, if that cybercrime is within the EU, does it typically work faster than having to work with outside members, or is all types of cybercrime investigations and prosecutions typically take the same amount of time? Is there differences in how accelerated it can be?
Well, there are definitely differences, and I think if everything were to be within the EU in terms of kind of
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure, the perpetrators and the victims, that can speed up processes just because it's, in terms of cross-border cooperation, the legal
Mm-hmm.
basis, there's more clarity, there is existing processes and connections in place. Whereas if it involves non-EU countries, you may have, delays there. Typically, the mutual legal assistance treaty is an
Mm-hmm.
example where we know that sometimes it takes quite a while to get a response to that. So this is actually one of the forward-looking strategic part where we try to see, how can we work together to improve some of those
Mm-hmm.
processes. But it really also depends on the topic. As EC3, we cover well, four main areas really. So it's cyber-dependent crime, cybercrime, it's payment fraud, it's the abuse of the dark web, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
combating child sexual abuse online. And so, depending also on what area we're talking about, what area we support, and
Mm-hmm.
what the investigation is about, there will be differences because
Okay.
different perpetrators, different OPSEC standards. So some of those investigations, particularly for instance in the
Mm-hmm.
area of child sexual abuse online, where perpetrators tend to have very high operation security standards can become very technical and typically
Mm-hmm.
require an international response. So it depends, and yeah, I would say within the EU and the more sort of a cybercrime case is limited geographically speaking, the faster you may get a response. But it really depends. You might have
Mm-hmm.
cases where even although they're within the EU, it might still take a long time because of the complexity, because of dependencies and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, it is very difficult, as you would probably know as well.
Yeah.
In
So
terms of,
one of the kind of next things that what is the most common types of investigations? You mentioned a little bit about let's say financial fraud payments and other types. What's the most common that you would typically get to see across your from your organization? What would be the most common that you would see that would typically kind of the one that we should be more concerned about?
well, it's definitely, and I think that shouldn't come as a surprise. I think ransomware really is the top threat, and what we see there is that the impact of ransomware goes way beyond the financial damage.
Hmm.
It's a global cybersecurity risk. If we're talking about attacks against critical infrastructure, against the hospitals, it is something that goes, really is a risk for public safety. Where everybody's life, can be threatened by or impacted by a cyber attack. If you think about, attack against a hospital,
Hmm.
so this is really the top list, which also means that we support a lot of investigation in that space. We also work in different coalitions and networks
Hmm.
that try to come up with a response, with a coordinated response, not just at the EU level but also globally. So I think that's also very important. But then there are other, we shouldn't forget there are many other types of criminal activity as well. We see a peak, a tick, or uptick in mobile malware, and I think that just
Hmm.
reflects how we use our phones these days. And obviously criminals will react to that. We still have a lot of CEO fraud, business email compromise,
Hmm.
where we also see criminals now abusing AI, artificial intelligence, to
Yeah.
emulate the voice of
The
CEOs. So
voice and videos is
that
on the uptick is very much, yes.
absolutely, and I think so. Those things are no longer the future. This is happening already. So, then obviously we have, unfortunately, in the area of child sexual abuse online,
Hmm.
significant increase in the production and distribution of material, of child sexual abuse material. Um, yeah, the payment fraud, I think, still
Hmm.
card not present fraud, credit card fraud, huge problem, but also attacks against ATMs, logical
Hmm.
attacks. So it's really a whole range of problems and challenges that we face, but definitely for the time being, ransomware really tops them for sure.
Yeah, I think I recently attended the first conference. For me, it was very insightful because for me, I've always been looking at ransomware and financial fraud and business email compromise. But that event really opened up my kind of horizon more to a broader scope of criminal activities that happens using the internet, and it wasn't limited to what I'm just used to. As you mentioned, child sex abuse. For me, that was pretty shocking about the extent, and especially how it's accelerated over the pandemic as well. That was quite shocking, and having anyone who has to work in that type of environment to investigate, and I think that's a difficult job to be doing. Can definitely lead to trauma and stress in some of those environments. So for the people that's working to bring those cases to prosecution and basically and fined, because it's not just they're being abused, but they're also being trafficked as well, and they may not be with the parents. They may be basically trafficked across multiple countries. So some of that was quite shocking. Absolutely, one of the things I loved, I loved Miko's recent comment that he made. It was that he basically quote out saying that we're no longer securing computers. That's a thing of the past. What we are securing now today is society and the digital society. To your point, it's about everything that we do day to day is based on technology, whether it being you taking a bus or traveling somewhere or purchasing something or doing online shopping, communicating with friends, or even going to, for example, medical, surgeries and appointments. Everything today is touching technology, and the severity. I think for me, one of the memories that I've had was, what's my worst nightmare? And I think the impact that technology can have is, that can actually result in deaths. Is that something that you would see? Have you seen any evidence of that today, or is that something that is directly related or indirect? What do you see in that area?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more. I think it is. I'm old enough to, when I used to go online, you had two computers screaming at each other, so it was a very conscious step you had to take to be online. And then, it was definitely the Wild West back then, but maybe less, definitely less criminality, I would say.
Mm,
Um, but now, of course, now we have a situation, as to your point, where being online is the norm, and a lot of times you don't even recognize that anymore. We have
mm,
devices around us, or on our body, or within our body that are connected to the internet. So I think in that sense, obviously, we create new dependencies, new quote unquote critical infrastructure. Now, I remember, back in 2014, every year we publish our
mm,
Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment Report, which looks at, the cybercrime landscape in the EU, what has happened in the last 12 months. We're trying to predict the future, and then we sometimes have a little bit of exotic topics where, in 2015, I think we already spoke about quantum computing and the
mm,
implications of that and artificial intelligence. But I remember in 2014, so the first time we published it, and it was obviously very exciting for us. And I remember we quoted an industry partner that predicted the first cyber death for 2015. And of course, that was, even though it was just a quote, of course, what
mhm,
happens then is, it says Europol predicts the first cyber death. But if you think about it, I mean, we know pacemakers have cybersecurity
mhm,
risks. We know insulin pumps have cybersecurity risks. Of course, it's possible that you could, tamper with those devices, and potentially there won't be any logs. So it's very hard to actually to prove that. So to your point, I think, it's likely it could have happened. Maybe we haven't seen it. We have, of
mhm.
course, and then we had, speaking of ransomware cases, for instance, in Germany, where a
Yeah,
patient had to be transferred from one ICU to another ICU because of a ransomware attack. I think there wasn't a causality, but there was certainly a link to that, and so this
correct.
is this is a very, very likely scenario. And yeah,
Absolutely.
it is about keeping society safe. It's no longer just an IT problem.
Absolutely. I mean, it brings back a lot of memories that for me, having managing large IT systems over the years. And I definitely think there's a big difference between having a direct fatality related to, a very targeted type of attack, that we'd be using technology and directly, target someone. But definitely, I think there's been a lot of cases of probably indirect, such as as you mentioned, the case in Germany where, a ransomware attack brought down a certain service, and they had to be retransferred to another hospital for that procedure. I've seen over the years. I mean, I myself, I was responsible for the Northern Ireland ambulance service for a period of time, And for me, if those systems were down for longer than 23 minutes, people died because that was the measurement of SLA that we had. That basically, if an ambulance wasn't able to get to a patient within that amount of time, the average would be that the potential casualty as a result of that. So if you think about just emergency phone lines, critical systems, if we weren't able to get an ambulance to the address, or the system that we were looking for let's say GPS positioning was not available, how could we find that person? So there's a lot of systems we heavily rely on. The postal records, the medical records, the GPS location, the communication side of things. Even to the point, back then we actually had installed defibrillators and EPGs in the ambulances, and they were directly communicating back to the emergency rooms in order to actually ensure the criticality of the patient before they arrived. Imagine that if those systems were unavailable as well, that the doctors wouldn't be able to prepare in the emergency room to know what to have, what's on the way, what's the priority, what types of systems they might need, or what types of beds they need available. So for me, absolutely, I strongly believe that this is becoming much more critical. And I think that we will see cases, both direct and indirect. I think it's more about the reporting of it. I think that's what we're probably not having, is the logging and auditing of it. So for me, I definitely think this is an area of concern. What for you? What kind of what's the areas that we should be working towards? And how do we get more success going forward? Because I have seen, can you mention some of the successes that you've had in recent times? Because I think we definitely need to report on the successes as well. Can you share some of those successes that you've seen cases of?
So absolutely, and I guess that's what you were also alluding to is when you talk about cyber and cyber risks and threats, it becomes very sort of gloomy and dark. The world is coming to an end. And I think I like your point. I mean, if you turn this around, first of all, there are successes, and secondly, you know, yes, there's cyber risk and threats, but there are huge opportunities that come with that. All things we just discussed, in the medical area, the medical Internet of Things, being able
Mhm,
to specifically target a treatment to a patient. I think those are huge improvements, and smart devices, you know,
mhm,
and of course, I think our task is really, or our challenge is to work together. And it's always just not law enforcement. That's the CSAT community, that's industry,
mhm.
that's academia, that's
Yep.
civil society. Everybody come together to make sure that we actually turn that into something, a secure and safe cyberspace that we call it. So I think to get there, um, I think a lot of the things that we need to do, we've been discussing for the last 10, 15 years. So
Mhm,
we use this expression that sharing information and collaboration is the thoughts and prayers of the cybersecurity
yep.
community. And so I think working towards solving the issues and say, how do we overcome the legal challenges? How do we
Mhm,
overcome the technical challenges in the form of tools? How do we build trust? And how do we create situations where, pipelines that go both ways, because, and I
mhm.
know that law enforcement is sometimes,
A
guilty
one-way
of
street.
that. It's a
It's a
one-way
one-way
street.
street.
And for
Absolutely.
legal and investigative reasons, it's very hard to give back. But, at least what we could do, and we try to do that,
Mhm,
tell our industry partners to say, well, this is the success, or give credit to them. So I think there is still a lot you can do without,
mhm,
having encountering any legal or confidentiality issues. So there are these challenges. I think for me, it really is actually, it's not so much about creating something new or finding the solution. I think the solutions are there. It's more about, walking the talk and seeing how
mhm.
do we actually implement that. And one of the challenges I actually see there is that there's not a lack of initiatives. There's probably potentially too many, and I could think of
Mhm,
so many, the Cyber Threat Alliance, doing great work, and
mhm,
the Joint Cyber Unit proposed by the Commission that will have an information sharing part. There's the Cyber Defense Alliance, where my former boss
mhm.
former boss heading there. So many different initiatives where, or
Even
the
the
efforts, the ISEX of
the ransomware task force as well, and
Thank
no
you.
more
The
ransomware.
ISEX,
Yeah.
they're all, it's all about information sharing. So I think, maybe also to see how we can ensure that they
Mhm,
complement each other, don't have unnecessary overlap. But what I do feel, I think we now have a momentum where we're going into the right way, where people realize, what, we need to also, overcome some of the trust issues that we
mhm,
may still have. For instance, if you take law enforcement, the CSIT community, we have, I think, come a long way to realize, hey, we're strong. We're stronger
Mhm.
together. We're equal partners, and we all both can sort of bring something to the table.
Yeah, we're all fighting the same crime and the same
Yeah.
criminal organization, and I found we're all superheroes in our own way. It's more about it's getting the Avengers coming together, working together, and there's a lot of superheroes out there doing different things. We just got to work together and communicate. I do have to say I have seen a major difference since I think the highlight was around 2019 that I saw a turnaround, and it was at the Talent Digital Summit in Estonia, and it was basically where it was about private industry and law enforcement working together to come up with basically an AI understanding about how to use AI with responsibility and accountability, and when it's good and when it's not good to use. And for me, that was one of the first time where it was bi-directional. It was very open, and as a result, we've got that was the starting point where it was a lot of government's initiatives and plans to really target how do we make sure that we're using AI in the right way and not getting into where it's being abused. And it was very directional. It was very cooperation. It was two-way communication, and as a result of that, it's accelerated a lot to the EU AI Act that we're starting to see now. I also, was it also mentioned to Chris Krebs recently. I commended him and his initiative with the CISA in the US as well, where they started actually proactively sharing intelligence information in order for the community to try and defend together. So for me, it was, I remember even recently hearing a talk from one of the FBI, was it officers as well, where he said, they've been listening for 100 years, and now they're struggling to get to the point where they're starting to talk more, and
Right.
that's a new direction for them. For me, I definitely in the last couple of years, it has been more cooperation rather than that one-way communication. And I think even with Europol as well, I think definitely I'm starting to see that ability to start working together and make sure that we can reduce the safe places for criminals to operate, and bring those prosecutions to a faster closure as well. So
Absolutely. You asked for examples. I mean, Emotet
mm,
takedown, I think that was a great
yes.
example. Yes, it's coming back, but the sort of the race continues to be that way. But I think that sort of really brought together industry,
Mm-hmm.
CSET community, law enforcement, the cryptocurrency community, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
All the different partners. It was a long and complex investigations, but at the end, a huge impact, or Flubot, another example
Mm-hmm.
recently. And what we saw there is also, you know, it's not always law enforcement. It's, well, quite often potentially, industry or, CISO community or academia that may have a
Mm-hmm.
solution, and then it's all about sharing that solution within the community.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, I think that's really has improved. But the reality, of course, it is it takes a lot of resources, and it's one case at a
Mm-hmm.
time. And of course, we prioritize those are high value targets that typically will have a huge impact, or we hope will have a huge impact
Mm-hmm.
on the cybercrime ecosystem, as it were. But
How, how, Yeah, absolutely. How,
yeah,
how critical is it? One of the things I've seen in the last couple of years, especially when you get to ransomware service or even organized crime now entering into this space of cybercrime, it's becoming an extra part of their let's say business model per se. And you started seeing a lot of criminals getting into specialization. How is that impacting where a cyber criminal can go and say, I will get the access. I will purchase it from this criminal gang. I will go and buy this type of ransomware or malware from this, malware creator. I will use another help desk organization to do the communication. I will use this cryptocurrency in order to do the funneling and cleaning the money trail. How is that impacting the investigations where you're no longer just dealing with one, central organized crime, and you've got many different elements?
well, obviously, I mean, as you said, it lowers the entry barrier for a lot of criminals, and if you start with sort of, I would say, the sort of the low tech services, in the sense,
Mhm.
think about distributed denial of service attacks, where you can, purchase booters and stressors online, and
Yeah.
for a small fee per month, everybody without any technical knowledge can attack, any kind of website,
Hmm.
and so that's a problem because that, opens up the dark side of the internet, if you will, to everyone. And then if you get
Hmm.
into the more, as you just described, more specialized services, it definitely had an impact because it means that, um, criminals get more, it becomes more professional, if I can
Hmm.
put it that way. Attacks are more, you know, harder to defend against, because, and take another example, counter AV services, counter
Hmm.
antivirus services. One of the examples of the services that, you also mentioned as part of the crime as a service model, where, if I've developed my malware, I can actually use that service to check whether the
Yeah.
current, AV tools in the market will detect it or not. And of course, that means, if they don't, you have some degree of confidence that, you will remain potentially be undetected.
Hmm.
So that's a challenge. It also means, we see a significant grow in scope, in financial damage, in
Hmm.
volume, especially when we talk about high volume, low value attacks.
Hmm.
This is from an investigative point of view a huge challenge because we don't have the resources to focus on those. So that's where
Hmm.
obviously prevention and awareness disruption becomes hugely important. And we do a lot of those activities as well. You mentioned no more ransom.
Yeah.
But if you turn this around, what is the positive thing? Well, you may be able to focus on certain key services that facilitate or
Hmm.
power the crime as a service model. And if you take those and target those and disrupt
Hmm.
those, that may have quite a significant impact on the rest of the ecosystem. So it also gives you opportunities, obviously.
Yeah. Look at this from a massive ecosystem supply chain and targeting the critical mass parts that most of those smaller entry level criminals are taking advantage of. If you take down the supply chain, then everyone will fail in that ecosystem.
Exactly.
So I
Yeah.
think that's probably one of the key things. What types of resources that you need to help kind of moving forward? Because we do have a massive skills issue and resources are hard to come by. What types of skill sets and resources is your organization need and looking for? And hopefully, anyone there who's listening to this, maybe it's something that they might be interested in seeking as a future career choice. How do they? What's the path to those who are in this industry to becoming a superhero? So,
Well, I think, I wouldn't see ourselves as
mm,
superheroes. As you said, I think everybody involved in that fight is a superhero because they all have a part to play. I mean, there's this, well, that famous story about, somebody working for NASA and just, being a cleaning person, and you ask that person, say, well, how do you get a rocket to the moon? I think that's is everybody's, part
mm,
part of part of this game, and being their own type of superhero. I think for us, it really is that point. Like I initially said, law enforcement as a service, providing key services and expertise as a service to the member states,
mm.
meaning that the 27 member states don't have to build up the same level of
Yeah,
expertise and tooling, because they can rely on Europol. But
it
having
becomes
said that,
shared. It becomes
exactly.
shared, and you have then expertise visibility across what's happening in other locations as well.
Exactly. Plus, I think, we do provide these sort of network of networks. So
Mm,
leveraging, the power of the network. So we have, as EC3, the European Cybercrime Centre, we have 3 advisory groups with about 70
mhm,
top-level experts from the security industry, from the banking sector, and from the telecommunications sector. And we work with them, on those issues. And it could be, related to investigations, it could be operational, technical, it could be related to capacity building, or it could be a policy related issue where we
mhm.
try to find, or inform discussions at that level, really depending on what the issues are. So I think this leveraging effect is also something that really I would think, is a service to member states. So for us, it's different profiles really. I think,
Mhm.
very technical, related to digital forensics, operation experience, people can do run investigations, analysts, but then also people who are, aware of policies and sort
Mhm.
of, can work in that space. So it's a range of different profiles that need to come together to be successful. And I think,
Absolutely.
looking at law enforcement, I think. those colleagues, I think now, we're seeing new generations coming out that, have
Hmm.
been always, be exposed to a digital environment. So I think they're probably potentially more equipped to,
Hmm.
be able to work in that field. But having said that, I think equally we've seen a lot of other colleagues, been in the field for a long time, that they've been able to scale up and skill up. And then of course you have that combination of technical expertise and long-standing investigative experience,
Hmm.
which is equally important. I think we talk about artificial intelligence and tool support. At the end of the day, we need to have human beings look at the data, make sense of it,
Yeah.
analyze it, and use their investigative experience to
Mass reduction is what AI is all about. Is let us
right.
focus on the things that's the most important things, and try to get rid of the noise. Definitely, it's. I've had a lot of fun discussions around that topic in recent months. If the audience, some of the audience who's in this industry or looking to get in the industry, where would they go to see what positions are open at Europol Cybercrime?
Well, I think a lot of our positions obviously would be, especially in the operation department, would be sort of law enforcement only. So that's for law enforcement colleagues who are interested in ideas. So it would be analysts, specialists in different
Hmm.
areas. Obviously, the European Cybercrime Centre is just one of the centres established at
Hmm.
Europol. We were the first one in January 2013. Well, we have the latest one is looking into financial crime. We have one dealing with counterterrorism. So really,
Hmm.
a range of different profiles and crime areas that where we look
Hmm.
for colleagues. But then we also have, a very large ICT department, as you would imagine. So we're also looking for data analysts,
Hmm.
just ICT people with a strong ICT profile. So the whole range, check out our website. I think there's a whole
Check it
range
out.
of interesting
We'll definitely
profiles.
make sure to get the website in the show notes for
Please do.
sure, so that
Yeah.
people can go directly to. One of the questions I've got is that because you know Europol's one that I've worked with for many years, and also even the NATO Cyber Defense Center of Excellence and other CSERTs across the world. And as you mentioned, it's all about cooperation and working together. And one that was recently interesting was around the Department of Justice in the US had released their new strategy about tackling ransomware and cyber terrorism, cyber crime. What's your thoughts on the strategy that they put out, which is really taking a more offensive approach than what they've done historically? Is that something kind of that we should all be looking at, or is that something they'll be working together with other international? Because as you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of these crimes are cross border. They're not typically, and I was always a bit worrying about when you start taking the offensive side. It means that you definitely can't leave that to private industry to carry that out. I prefer to have the law enforcement or the agencies in countries that are authorized to do that, because you never know when a proxy or a country that's also a victim is being abused. So, what's your thoughts around that type of initiative?
Well, so I think first of all, just so as a caveat, that was not something that Europol will be involved in. I mean, we support
Mhm.
member states, so they lead the investigations. We support them.
Mhm.
I think as a general point, as you just mentioned, I think taking offensive steps, I think it comes with a lot of risks. As you
Mhm.
said, it can be misinterpreted. Interpreted. There might be unwanted side effects, knock-on effects that
Yep.
you can't control. So, I think in that regard, I think it's a very risky strategy. Again, Europol wouldn't be involved in that.
Mhm.
Now, specifically on the strategy you mentioned, I think we noted with interest, to put it that way, that there was it seemed the way I understood it was there's a sort of a priority given to disruption and
Mhm.
taking down critical infrastructure over potential prosecution. So the way I read it is like, well, if we have a chance to disrupt the infrastructure, the current business model, and take the risk that we, tip off the criminals, that's gonna be the priority. And that probably was informed also by the fact that, we do see criminal safe havens, and that's
Yep.
that's I think a reality for any kind of cybercrime investigation, is that, apart from the technical challenges, the cross-border challenges, the legal challenges, even you get to the point where you identify the perpetrators, the criminals, they may be sitting in jurisdictions that are less cooperative, and so you
That
don't get to them.
Yeah, that it
So,
might be not even considered a crime in those countries because the laws are so
essentially,
old and outdated and still from the 80s and 90s.
yeah. So I think then that's so I think it's certainly a very interesting
Mhm.
strategy. But like I said, for us, that's not something that Europol would definitely not be involved in. And I personally definitely see a lot of risks that come with it. And so, if a country were to take those steps, I think you really have to have a very good understanding of, the pros and cons, as it were.
Yeah,
What you
you
gain
have
in
to be
that space.
accountable and
Absolutely.
responsible
Yeah.
when you take those types of actions, and it should, maybe be considered as a last resort overall. Because for me, I think prosecution should always be the primary objective, and offensive is the last resort when you've run out of all possible options, including policy and
Diplomacy.
political
Yeah.
side of things. Yeah, for me, I think those should always be the primary, because the offensive measures are temporary measures, because you're just limiting, you're just basically pushing them down in the future, until they set up new infrastructure and redo it again, because people have backups, not just the good organizations and the good people. The criminals also have backups as well, and we should suspect that they can restore those and recover. One of the things you just mentioned on it, it's definitely a passion of mine, is less safe havens. For me, that would be the measurement that we should be looking at as a primary measurement, is because the less safe havens that these perpetrators can operate from, I think the more safer digital society we get. If you look at even just the likes of North Korea, for example, while they can't operate those activities from within the country, they tend to operate from other countries that are, let's say, more connected, and give them the bandwidth and the ability to operate. But again, countries that may not have cooperation. For me, it's all about going back to the cooperation, transparency, working together, that and kind of getting rid of most of those safe havens, so that putting pressure on governments to cooperate and not allow cyber criminals to use their infrastructure to attack others. What's your thoughts around that approach? Is it?
Well, I think, like I said, I think, we need to work together to make cyberspace safer and more secure.
Mhm,
Meaning, we need to address the criminal abuse, we need to address criminal safe havens, and see how we can collectively, find address those
mhm,
issues. I think for us, obviously the EU has, I think it's quite effective, very effective, is the cyber diplomacy toolbox. With the different
mhm,
um, measures and options that the EU has to respond to that, and use them in that context. But like you said, I think it's like with any kind of sort of global issues, the community needs to come together and see, how do
mhm,
how do we address that? What are the problems? Is it a technical problem? Sometimes, it could be a capacity problem, in the sense
mhm.
that the country may not be actually aware of the fact that they're being abused, that their infrastructure is being abused. So,
Absolutely.
you might solve the problem by, providing services and helping them, upscale their security. And there might be other measures and other situations where we need to work together. So obviously, I'm sure you're aware of it. The discussions that have been kicked off at UN level with the
Mhm,
new cybercrime treaty. Um, this is obviously something we follow. We're not
absolutely.
directly involved in it, but we follow that very closely. I mean, we have obviously the Budapest Convention as the effective tool.
Mhm,
Probably the only tool, or the only tool right now, to provide that legal basis to combat cybercrime. But now, obviously, we need to follow those discussions now as well. But I think the key point for me is to have the community to identify those
mhm.
measures that are most effective and efficient in addressing those issues. And of course, if we talk about, it's of course, cyberspace, but you could take probably any kind of
Mhm.
crime area. You'll always have those criminal safe havens, potentially, depending on what crime it is.
Yeah. There'll always be those places, but we can always kind of look to restrict their ability to strike on other nations, and maybe even hold them to political or economical kind of restrictions, kind of until they decide that cybercrime is not a business that they want to support. So I absolutely agree. For what types of resources do you make available? Just kind of, if there was places that the audience can go get resources that are valuable. You mentioned the yearly annual report that you produce. Is there other types of materials or resources that the audience could find very valuable that would help them join in the fight of cybercrime?
Well, definitely, our annual report. which we publish on our website. So all these reports I've mentioned are on our website. We've not too long ago published a report on the criminal uses and abuses of artificial intelligence together with Unicre and Trend Micro. That's on our website. And then more recently, we had a dedicated report on deepfakes in law enforcement.
Okay.
That was
I think.
coordinated by our Innovation Lab. We recently had a workshop on the metaverse, policing the metaverse, so looking into that as well. So that's also something we try to do, sort of, become more
Mhm.
proactive, look ahead, get ahead of the curve. Take cryptocurrencies, for instance. We had our annual conference this year on cryptocurrencies was dedicated to decentralized finance.
Mhm.
And it's quite amazing to look at that because you go like, well, a normal cryptocurrency transaction is the default. We all need to
Mhm.
know, also law enforcement, how to investigate that. But the future is already here. Again, we're talking
Mhm.
about, smart contracts. We're talking about liquidity pooling. We're talking about new concepts, tokens,
Mhm.
and they're being abused. We see this, so that means, again, a huge challenge for law enforcement, but also industry, I suppose, to scale up and, you be ready and work together. So we also have reports and conferences in that space. We have,
Mhm.
also which is probably, I think definitely linked to our discussion. We not too long ago, together with Professor Mary Aiken, we published
Yep. It's
with
amazing.
our executive
I love
director
the yeah. I love
the cyber.
Miri's input on the CSI cyber. That
Yeah.
was one of her is amazing. And
s-
she congratulate Miri for getting the keys to Dublin, which is
Absolutely.
fantastic award. So for Miri, congratulations. We do applaud everything she does to the community. It's
Absolutely.
definitely well.
But we published together with, and supported by our executive director, a position paper called the Cyber Blue Line. So the idea
Hmm.
was to, it's sort of more sort of a general strategic position paper where we talk about, where do you draw the line, the blue
Yeah.
line, what's the role of law enforcement? And it shouldn't come as a surprise that also that calls, the position paper calls for a discussion.
Hmm.
It's again, it's not up to law enforcement, it's up to industry,
Hmm.
to set the standards, create those realities that we all have to live with. But really, we need to come together collectively to decide what is it that we want in terms of, online safety, online
Hmm.
security, and if you will, even the point that the point that we discussed about from safe havens, that again is a discussion to be had at that level, at
Hmm.
international level, to see how do we approach that, whether the measures, whether the challenge is there. So I think that's on our website. So a lot of different reports, but what I
Hmm.
wanted to specifically mention is, first of all, in terms of public-private partnership, I think one of the best examples I could think of is our No More Ransom initiative.
Hmm.
So that's nomoreransom.org. And it's something that we started about 6 years ago with two industry partners in the Dutch police. And now it's available, I think, in 37 different languages, or 38 it might be.
Yep.
But most importantly, it gives you access to more than 120 different tools that you can use to decrypt your data for free. So we've
Hmm.
been able to help, well, at least last year we had we looked at the statistics, very conservative estimate. After 5 years, so that was last year, June, July, we were able to help 6.2 million victims, and some of them were
Wow.
large corporations that were able to do that.
That's impressive, and it's definitely it's a fantastic resource, and one that always recommending that. It's a if you think about how many people organizations is benefiting, you think about the savings of financial and potentially lives as a result of that as well, because some people there has been instances of that could be potentially devastating to people's lives financially and economically if those businesses are had to close.
Exactly.
So I think that's a great kind of example of the impact that the organization and the service is having. One of the things I'd like to kind of get into as well is that is just kind of for the audience to kind of some final words of wisdom that you would like to share with the audience, or kind of what things that they can do kind of to make a difference.
Yeah, I think when we talk about cybercrime, yes, it's complicated. Takes a lot of partners
Mm.
to be, successful in investigations. But I think we all can do something. Sometimes that or I
Mhm.
think it can become a little bit overwhelming. You're like, okay, there's nothing I can do. There's the cyber wild west out there. But I think you can do a lot. I think you can, raise your own awareness. Work, you know, realize what you can do to protect yourself online. Use a password manager, use multi-factor authentication. Um, be smart with your passwords. Be smart with your uh, digital online footprint, what you share online. So I think we can do a lot of things to raise the bar, to
Mhm.
collectively raise the cybersecurity bar, to make it that much harder for criminals to be successful. I mean,
Yeah.
when you see something, you get a spam email, think twice. Is that really? Does that make sense? Whatever you read, whatever you read there. So I think we can do a lot. We can also work with our children.
Mhm.
Like we teach them to be safe in the real world. When they cross the street, I think equally
Absolutely.
work with them. Talk to them to let them know how they can be safe and secure online. But equally, other communities, the elderly, our parents and
Mhm.
grandparents, to help them, just be safe online. And it could be simple things like lock down their phones or make it very easy
Mhm.
for them to go online and just minimize the risk. So I think what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say is that I think there are many easy things we can do, like having strong passwords, multi-factor
Mhm.
authentication, having backups, being aware of what you share online, that we can do to protect ourselves, and make collectively
So, so I
everybody
think
safer and secure.
it got me thinking. We definitely need to expand the cyber ambassadors or mentors to society.
Oh yeah.
Is we have we've got helplines for many different things. Why don't we have helplines for digital safety? Maybe that's an initiative that we kind of need to think about. So, if you have questions, you don't know, who to ask. It's not Ghostbusters you're going to call. It's the digital safety line.
Exactly.
um, so maybe that's an initiative that we need to consider going forward. And it did get me thinking. My mind started when you talked about the metaverse. Metaverse, I started thinking about what if my avatar or my digital house gets stolen? Is
Exactly.
there a
Yeah.
is there is there a process for me to follow from a law enforcement perspective? You get a call saying, my digital house on the metaverse had been stolen and I can't find it. what do you do? It brings a lot of
Absolutely.
questions up. It's interesting, an interesting realm to go. Philip, you've been
Absolutely.
awesome on the show, and many thanks for answering. I always have lots of questions in my mind, and so many thanks for going through and answering them all. It's fantastic. I hopefully get to see you again in the near future. For the audience, again, it's been fantastic having Philip on. And, it's a true, even though you don't have a cape, you are, for me, you're one of the the infosec superheroes out there. It is truly, really every single day, in the fighting cybercrime and making sure that we actually the world can be a safer place. And as a result, you definitely highlighted some major wins and successes that does show that this does work. Even though we don't hear about it every day in the news because the news prefers to have a bit more of a fear, but we are seeing successes, and thank you for you and the team for all the work that you do. For the audience, tune in every 2 weeks. Again, this is the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm your host for the episode. We will have Chloe back again soon. She's unavailable just to the time zone today, but stay safe, take care, and talk to you all soon. Thank you.